take him inside to call our parents.
This is a memory from my childhood that still haunts me to this day. It was a regular Saturday afternoon, the sun occasionally peeking out through the clouds. Mum had gone to the grocery store and said she'd be back soon. This was back in the 90s. I was in the front yard, tossing a ball against the wall, lost in thought. Out of the blue, 2 kids around my age appeared. Their clothes seemed old-fashioned, like they were from a slightly different time. I greeted them with a smile and invited them to play catch. But as they looked up, their eyes caught my attention and fear gripped me. Their eyes were deep black, like the night sky, white parts and all. In an attempt to shake off the unease, I suggested we play a game. The girl, speaking gently but urgently, said they needed to go inside to use our phone to call their mum. I remembered Mum's words about not letting strangers inside when she wasn't home. With a nervous smile, I declined their request, saying, "Sorry, I can't help you." I quickly went inside and locked the door, peeking through the window. I couldn't see them out the window, but was so freaked out that I didn't dare go outside to find out. When Mum returned, I told her everything. She reassured me that I did the right thing, following the safety rules. As I grew older, my curiosity led me to the internet, where I started reading about strange encounters just like the one I had. Turns out, I may have had a run-in with the black-eyed kids. Nothing really ever happened to me on that day, or after, but those eyes haunted my dreams for a long time. After finishing up a late shift delivering pizzas, all I wanted was to hit the sack. It was one of those nights where exhaustion felt like it could consume me whole. The familiar route home seemed to stretch on forever, each stoplight prolonging the journey. As I waited at a red light, I noticed 2 small figures on the sidewalk. It was late, and seeing anyone out at this hour in this part of town was unusual, let alone what appeared to be children. They strolled over to my car. They looked young, but something felt off. They seemed out of place, like they didn't belong here. The girl approached my car and asked for a ride home. Simple enough, but as they got closer, I noticed their eyes. Those eyes were pitch black, like there was no end to them. It sent a shiver down my spine, a chill that I couldn't shake off. I hesitated but managed to decline. "Sorry, I can't help you." Just as the light turned green, I hit the gas, driving away, but I couldn't help glancing back in the rearview mirror. They were standing there, their eyes fixed on my car. The unease grew with each passing moment. When I reached home, I quickly recounted the bizarre encounter to my roommate. He listened carefully, then calmly mentioned that he'd heard about these kids before. The black-eyed children, that's what they called them. It was unsettling to think that what I had experienced was part of a bigger, eerie story. I looked them up online and did some searching on Reddit, and from what I read, they seemed very similar to what I experienced. That night left a mark on me, is an experience that has stayed with me, and has made me more apprehensive during those late night drives home after work. This happened back in 2022. There was a storm that night. The wind was howling, and rain was hitting my windows really hard. I was all by myself, reading a book on the sofa with only a lamp on, My boyfriend at the time had to stay back late at work, so I had left the front porch light on for his return in a couple of hours. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the front door, and it startled me. Why was someone knocking when the doorbell is clearly there, right next to the door? I remember thinking. For some reason, this fact really set me on edge. There was no way it could be my boyfriend, as he had only just called me, and I knew he wouldn't be back so soon. Plus, he has a key, and if he didn't, he would use the doorbell. I went to the door and peeked through the peephole. I saw two kids, a boy and a girl. They had their hoods up, and their hoods covered most of their faces. Although it was raining heavily, I clearly remember that they were not soaked like I expected. In fact, they seemed dry. While I continued to watch them through the peephole, the boy suddenly looked up and stared right at me through the peephole.
Can we come inside to call our parents?
The boy said. It was less of a question and more of a command. It made me nervous, but I couldn't understand why. I was about to say yes and open the door when I noticed their eyes. They were both staring at me now, but there was no way they could have known I was there. Their eyes were all black, like there was nothing there. I got really scared. I stepped away and said through the door, "Sorry, I can't help you." I made sure the door was locked, turned off the lights, and got as far away from the door as possible. The knocking kept going, slow and relentless. I felt such an intense feeling of dread, like nothing I've ever felt before, and prayed that they would leave soon. For what felt like hours, I just stood there in my kitchen, listening to the knocking and shaking slightly. It felt like forever. The storm outside was loud, but the knocking was somehow louder. Finally it stopped. Everything was quiet, but I still could not shake that feeling. My boyfriend came home 2 hours later. I told him everything that had happened, and he was super apologetic that he had to come home so late. He almost dismissed the whole thing, but I guess the look on my face made him realize something not normal had happened. I still get nervous when I'm home alone on stormy nights. This is an encounter I experienced in the summer of 2009. I was born and raised in the plains of Texas, specifically in an area where black-eyed kid sightings are prevalent. I'd heard the stories, tales, legend, whatever you want to call them, since I was a young man, but never truly believed them. The black-eyed kids was mainly something I entertained as a joke or something to get a rise out of people. This changed in the summer of 2009. It was a warm night in June. I was up late around 2 a.m. as I typically like to stay up late, especially in the summer since it would stay fairly warm even after the sun went down. I had just run up to the store to grab a big fountain drink and was returning into my house through the back door when I was approached by two children, a boy and a girl. I was very startled once I realized that they were there, since I wasn't expecting to encounter anyone in my backyard so late at night. The little boy asked, "Could we come in? We need to use the phone. We are lost." This is when I noticed the blackness of their eyes. Both of them had eyes so black they were like pits. This is also when my heart sank. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing them, that they were there right in front of me. As I mentioned before, I had heard the legends of the black-eyed children most of my life, so there was no way I was going to let them in my house. I darted through the back door and locked it as quickly as I could. Once I was inside, I ran upstairs and flipped on the lights to see if they were still outside. I had so much adrenaline pumping by that point though, that I grabbed a weapon and began searching the house and making sure all doors and windows were locked. It took me hours to get to sleep that night, and it's an encounter that will stay with me for the rest of my life. These entities took the form of something most people view as innocent, weak, mild, and tried to trick unsuspecting people to do God knows what with or to them. I am glad my reflexes kicked in, and I was able to live to tell the tale. I read a similar encounter online recently, and it jogged my memory of an encounter that I hadn't thought about in a long time. This happened in my early teens, about 10 years ago. It was late afternoon and the sun was beginning to set. We were at the neighborhood park, our usual hangout spot as early teens. It was one of those evenings just like any other, just me and my friends hanging out and talking shit. Then, my friend Joey asked, "Who are they?" In the distance, we noticed two figures approaching. Their appearance struck us as odd. They were dressed in all dark clothes and hoodies, and judging from their size, seemed a couple of years younger than us. What seemed even more odd was the way that they hid their faces under the shadows of their hoods. Curiosity mingled with a sense of unease as these particular kids asked if they could join us. Their voices, although polite, had an unusual and haunting resonance, sending a shiver down our spines. It's like they just hit our ears the wrong way. One of my friends, Paul, a bit more daring than the rest, asked why they kept their faces hidden like that. With an almost deliberate slowness, they pushed back their hoods, revealing their faces and, more importantly, their eyes. The sight that met us was beyond disturbing. Their eyes were like deep voids, devoid of any light, and it felt as if they could swallow you whole. It was a sight that made our hearts race, a primal fear that gripped us. A surge of fear and adrenaline surged through us, and without a second thought, we scattered, each of us running in a different direction, leaving the park behind. We didn't look back. We just ran. We met back up at Joey's place and discussed what we had experienced. We had never seen anything like it. Those two kids both had eyes pure black. We had no idea what we had encountered. In the days that followed, the memory of that encounter lingered, refusing to fade. We told stories about that encounter to other kids at school, but none of them ever believed us and thought we were just making it up to scare them. But we knew it happened, and we never returned to that park, ever again. This happened last winter, on a cold night, the kind that makes you just want to cozy up at home with a warm blanket and a heater. It had been steadily raining since about 3 that afternoon. My 4-year-old son, Jake, was playing with toys in the living room, and I was watching some show on TV while keeping an eye on him. We were waiting for my husband to return from his evening shift at the factory. All going well, he should be home before Jake went to bed. The pitter-patter of rain on the windows created a comforting ambience. We were both enjoying a calm night together, just before Jake's bedtime. That's when I heard it. The sound of soft knocks at the front door. I thought it was odd because it was quite late and raining outside. I went to the door, peeking through the peephole. 2 kids stood there. 2 boys, a bigger one and a smaller one. The smaller looked perhaps a little older than Jake, whilst the bigger looked around 9 to 10 years old. They both had their faces turned down to the floor, and didn't seem to even acknowledge each other's presence, if that makes sense. Like, usually two kids waiting together would talk to one another, glance at each other, or at least stand a little closer together. I opened the door, but kept the screen door closed. Something was odd about this situation. "Can I help you?" I asked, starting to feel something was a little off about the two. The older boy spoke, his voice polite but somehow seemed rehearsed. "Can we come in? We need to use your telephone." I felt a tinge of worry and apprehension. I told them I couldn't let them in, but they could use my cordless phone at the front door, or I could call the number for them. This barely got any reaction from them. They continued staring down. Then the older boy repeated his earlier statement, but put a little more emphasis on the word need, and his tone seemed to have a hint of malice in it. "Can we come in? We need to use your telephone." When he said it, he looked at me, and I could get a clear look at his face. I barely suppressed a gasp. His eyes were completely black, even the white parts. The fear I felt was almost primal, like it was some kind of instinct. All I could mumble out was, "I'm sorry, I can't help you," and close the door. I know I should try and help a pair of children like this at night, but the fear I felt upon seeing his eyes made me so scared I couldn't think rationally. I locked the door and returned to the living room. The knocks continued for a bit, slow but persistent, but I tried to shrug it off, turning up the TV volume and chatting with Jake to take my mind off it. Later, when my husband came home, I recounted the strange encounter. He said I did the right thing, especially with our child in the house. He actually suggested that I may have had an encounter with black-eyed kids. He's really into the paranormal and knows about this kind of thing. I had never heard of them, so I did a quick Google search, and sure enough, there were plenty of stories, just like mine. I never saw them again, but I'll never forget those dark, soulless eyes. Last night, I got a call from a military buddy that he was looking for a ride home from the bar and didn't want to spend $30 on an Uber ride. I said sure. I was hungover myself and figured it would help to drive with the windows down and get some fresh air. It was probably 12:30 a.m. and I was driving around my neighborhood trying to take an alternate route that I hadn't taken before but knew about. Basically, one that went through residential areas and stayed off of the bigger, more populated routes. I didn't really want to fight traffic the entire way getting downtown. So, as I'm driving, everything was normal. I was listening to some random podcast about World War II. But then, as I'm passing down this one random house a couple of streets down from mine, there's a kid standing in the front yard right on the edge of the road. To be honest, this doesn't really sound that weird. But looking back, it was past midnight and this kid was maybe 10 to 11 years old. He had on a red shirt, tan shorts and sneakers, with a blonde bowl cut. Totally normal looking kid. So, as I'm coming up to this kid, I get to a speed bump and had to slow down, so I was able to get a better look at him. He wasn't playing. He wasn't running around. No other kids were with him. He was just standing completely still and meeting my gaze as I'm going past. Like, the entire way down the street, he doesn't stop staring. And after I had passed him, I kept looking at my rearview mirror, and he still doesn't stop looking. He doesn't cross the street or go back to playing around. He just keeps standing there, staring at my truck. On the drive back, I told my friend after picking him up about the kid, and he was interested, so I took him back through the same way. The same way where I saw the kid. This time, he wasn't there. Fast forward to when me and my friend get back to my place. sitting in my living room shooting the shit, watching YouTube, and we hear this super fast, quiet knocking at the door. Like, so quiet my AC almost completely smothered the sound. It's about 1:30 a.m. at this point, and both my roommates are out of town for the long weekend, so I was kind of wary of answering the door. I peek out the window next to the front door and see no one there. Honestly, this could have just been a tree limb hitting the roof near the front door, but in that moment, it was like I was having a heart attack thinking that I'd see the kid there. Later, when I was in bed, laying there, I heard a few more random knocks in different places. My bedroom is right next to the front door and goes out onto the patio that the front door connects to. These knocks could have been at the front door or just in some random spots in the house. At this point, I was so tired I really didn't care to worry about it and passed out. Waking up this morning and thinking about those knocks creeped me out a bit more, but just doing a walkthrough of my front patio, nothing was out of the regular, so there's not much else to go on. I know this really isn't the most bone-chilling story, but kinda goes to show how kids can be so creepy with zero effort.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.